It's remarkable, and I can't imagine the consternation in the Kremlin and Russian FSB headquarters and the security services. How could this happen? And knowing a little bit about the Russian system, there will be major repercussions. And if people are just fired, they're lucky. And there'll be a real shakeup.
Hello. In this episode of On the Edge, we'll be speaking with retired Brigadier General Peter Zwack, who is currently a global fellow at the Wilson Center, one of America's foremost think tanks when it comes to this region. But previously, he had been Military Attache at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, and he spent a lot of time talking with his counterparts. So he knows the Russian armed forces about as well as anyone. We speak to him in the context of what happened with Operation Spiderweb, Ukraine's innovative new technique and operation that shocked the world with their capability to use drones to strike deep into the Russian Federation. We talk to General Zwack about all of this, keeping in mind what it means for the Russian Ministry of Defense, what it means for the Kremlin, and what it means for the Russians, not least of which also what it means in terms of this war and conducting warfare in general in a post-Operation Spiderweb world. So, General Peter Zwack, thank you so much for joining us here at On the Edge. Normally we don't do kind of newsy kind of things, but this is an event. What happened here with this Operation Spiderweb is an event that is going to be a milestone in the history of this conflict. But I'd like to get your impression as a military man. What does this mean? I mean, what is your take on the scale and scope of this?
We have a new revolution of military affairs going on in the 21st century. And the Ukrainians have taken it to a new step. While drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, etc., have been around a while, the application and use of them, with, I would say, Ukraine leading the way, has really opened a paradigm shift, not just in the air, but on how you deploy forces on the ground and at sea. And the innovation, and there's nothing like innovation when your nation is in an existential fight for its life. And creativity led to this remarkable feat. Imagine the Russians. They've got, 4 or 5 strategic bomber bases, far out of touch, seemingly from the front. And they're hit as far away as the Russian Far East in Irkutsk, up near the Arctic Circle near Murmansk, and a couple in the midriff, if you will, of Russia. Complete surprise, simultaneous strikes. Imagine the coordination to do that, and how the Ukrainians' unbelievable imagination and chutzpah, how did they get these wooden crates to within a few miles or kilometers of these air bases unseen, unknown, hiding in plain sight, one near a FSB headquarters, and the tops pop, and out come UAVs, and they are directed, and I think there's still a question how they were programmed. The first-person view. Was there a person nearby? Was it AI? Don't know, but they landed with real accuracy on a number of Russian strategic bombers, seemingly safe in sanctuary. And don't know the number. It's being bandied around between 10 aircraft and 20 aircraft now. I don't think the Russians have lost but one or two major aircraft, big aircraft, since the beginning of the war. And that's mostly by accident. And a couple of what we call AWACS, the A-50, the radar, which are really, really important for strategic command and control. They don't fly over Ukraine, but they fly off of Ukraine, and they kind of direct flights.
Or over the Black Sea.
Missions, or over the Black Sea. And, the Bear bombers and the Tu-22s, blinders, they will fly a standoff as far as the Caspian Sea. And if you remember earlier on, their nickname were milk cows, flying over the Russian side. They were flying from Belarus, Black Sea when they had control. They don't anymore.
Right.
It's remarkable, and I can't imagine the consternation in the Kremlin and Russian FSB headquarters and the security services. How could this happen? And knowing a little bit about the Russian system, there will be major repercussions. And if people are just fired, they're lucky. And there'll be a real shakeup. So the other piece of this, it's opened up another I think for all of our nations, another lane in modern warfare. Can you get these things close to, from an American point of view, close to an American base in the United States or internationally?
Diego Garcia or at Interlick.
They could be fired off of ships.
Yeah.
And so this has opened up a lot. Now, for Ukraine, huge shot in the arm, huge motivator. The population had to have been beside itself, almost disbelieving. It looks like that the reports were a bit exaggerated, but even a bit exaggerated, it was extraordinary. And it showed the world, it showed the Russians, it showed my country and your country, the United States, and our allies, that the Ukrainians still have a lot of moxie, and they still have, quote unquote, cards to play, which they did in remarkable fashion. I could go on, but
well, I want to ask you about that. Because there has been what I have seen in the discourse in the United States. What has kind of become this: the Russians are inevitable, the Russians are a force of nature that cannot be stopped. Ukraine will eventually lose this war, and that seemed to be gaining traction certainly in the GOP and other certain sectors of America. What do you perceive within the military community and in America in general with what is almost a 180 in that narrative?
First of all, there are a lot of Americans that support Ukraine, and a lot of it is how it's presented, and sadly, politics has entered into it. Our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, did not attend a couple days ago the latest meeting of the Ukrainian contact group in Germany, where 50 heads of ministers of defense get together and figure out how to help and apportion resources, assets to Ukraine. And we were not at that for the first time. And it was General Austin who actually created that at the beginning of this war. So politically, I think that the President Trump, I think he still has a preference for the Russians. I'll use that word, but I think that's been shaken a bit. I think that if you look at things strategically, Phil, I would say two things happened in the last 5 weeks, last month. One, you had all of a sudden in Turkey, between Turkey and the UAE, the Gulf states, a situation where Zelensky was there. No, Trump was there. Zelensky was willing to come there, and Putin was invited to join them. And there's all this back and forth and all that. And Putin balks. And I think that for President Trump, who has put a lot into brokering, leading, if you will, the peace effort, this really, really bothered them. And right in the middle of it, and right through the most recent weeks, the Russians have unleashed, even bigger barrages, as you have been living with your friends.
Yeah, I was an eyewitness to it. We had a few sleepless nights recently. Yeah.
My visit to Kyiv, now it's almost 2 years ago, was virtually the very night when U.S. Patriots were operationalized around Kyiv and fired to intercept missiles coming in. So
it's quite a thing.
I got
quite a thing to witness.
Yeah, out of my hotel window, and just to get a little piece of that, 1/100th of a hundredth of what you all have done, and the Ukrainians are doing, was very eye-opening. Now, the Ukraine is, if you've been watching the U.S. Congress, Senate, they're getting restive about not supporting Ukraine. Even Lindsey Graham, who's been back and forth, Senator Lindsey Graham, has pretty well come out and said that we've got to do more for Ukraine, and he had kind of whipsawed to the MAGA view. He's kind of a weather vane, and so now the support against the war, U.S. involvement, has, I think, weakened, and this event helped reinforce that Ukraine is worth supporting. There's no, people can get frustrated, the Ukrainians, and asking for this and all of that. And this is a nation fighting for its life. Zelensky is the president of a nation fighting for its life over the last 3 years. And you will do, at this point, anything to survive. And I think that we're getting we're beginning to come around again. That's my feeling. And look at the Europeans. The Europeans, it's not pretty, but they have coalesced somewhat behind Zelensky and the Ukrainians, have kind of pulled together a united front. Now they're providing a lot of resources and stuff. Could do more even, but they've also just, and who could have imagined this a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, they've given the Ukrainians green lights to fire their long-range rockets and missiles deep into the Russian hinterland. And and these are pretty capable systems. And we've come around somewhat to that. We're still holding some things back, but and now just recently, Phil, friends, just the second round of negotiations, if you will, between the Ukrainians and the Russians, and moderated by in the UAE and in Turkey. The Russians have not budged on their very inflexible position. And
well, they're making advances in the east. There's no disputing that. It may be small and incremental, but it is continuous. On the ground, in the battlefield, out east in Ukraine, they are making advances, and I think that was informing their position. Do you think this attack, this covert attack, changes their metrics?
I think that for now, I would be strap in for possibly an even more vicious Russian reaction. We've seen some missiles over the last couple of days, but I've got to believe that Vladimir Putin is seething right now, embarrassed by this. His people are embarrassed and afraid. And as I said, in various staff heads and their air defense and all that, I'm sure that a bunch of people were fired. They'd be lucky for that.
Or fall out of their basement window, as somebody explained.
Now, the other, getting at your point, I'm going to come back to it, is the Russians have been inflexible about they want more Ukrainian territory, especially the remainder of the 4 oblasts that they have major chunks of. And then the Ukrainians can't build their army up anymore, or they want them to reduce it. We've talked about no security guarantees. They want Ukraine to be neutral. They're trying to emasculate Ukraine. And I think people are seeing it for what it is. And Medvedev, the deputy security council former president, Dmitry Medvedev, just a couple of days ago said that I forget the exact term, but we want to finish Ukraine as a state, as a nation. And it was very, very definitive. that all these things going on in the battlefield, it may look bite by bite, but they still have in their mind the plan, the end game that they had in the winter of 2022, when they are on the approaches to Kyiv. They want to take out. They want complete dominance over Ukraine, and they want to, and that includes its Russian language in Ukraine, all of it. And the Ukrainians aren't going to have it. And I think that
I equate their desire for, especially the oblasts, Zaporizhia and Kherson. I'm to make this something that an American audience would understand. This is like taking San Diego and saying, "Well, now give us the rest of California." It obviously is not going to be acceptable to the Ukrainians.
No, and you're exactly right. And the Ukrainians have proven over and over. And yes, there is some dissent. And there are deserters and all of that. And that would be normal in any free society, including even our own. But the bulk are all in to the fight. They don't want to be in the fight. But you're dealing with the modern day equivalent of the Mongols. And oh, by the way, the North Koreans. How depraved can a Western or a nation that purports to be of a Western civilization could be to bring in North Korean soldiers? I don't want to call them mercenaries, or something other than that, into the fight in Kursk, in that area. And if they think that's going to intimidate the Ukrainians, like they thought the Chechens would intimidate them, no, the Ukrainians will fight even harder with the introduction of truly alien forces, sort of on the edge of Eastern Europe. So all of this is going on. And I think much of this is we're past that, but just in disbelief in how the many angles and curves this war has taken. But the bottom line, and I'll stop here, is that Ukrainians are fighting to the end. It really looks that way. There'll be dissent, but the bulk are all in. As I said when I left Ukraine, even back in 2023, this is a societal fight. The entire society is fighting. That's a different word than nation. Men, women, and some children. Don't like it, but they're in it. It's grim, but there seems to be resolve. The Russians are still drafting the bulk of their troops from not the main, what you would call great Russian cities. They're keeping it out into the hinterland, the farmlands, the steppe, and the ethnicities that they bring in, Buryats and other groups that they can use as cannon fodder. Because the thing that, of course, any autocratic that has evolved now into a dictatorship fears it's the people, and Putin and the regime is always looking over its shoulder to the people. One last step. This thing, Phil, was caught on Russian media, social media, internationally. they can't hide it from their own people. So they've been in a major spin mode. But the bottom line is the Ukrainians hit deep, across the 11 time zone Russia, almost from east to west, in every longitude. It was amazing. Okay, back to you. You got me on a
No, that's what we're. But we like to have a discussion here, so I want to convey to you from here in Kiev, and please tell all of your associates, your former colleagues, anybody that you know, that the morale here is high. This was a shot in the arm. You're right. The bulk of people in Ukraine recognize the threat. They want to resist Russian aggression. There is exhaustion, but there is very little discussion of giving up. But having said that, I also need to say, and we are filming this on June 4th, so this will, there's a lot that can happen before we publish on Sunday. So we are all here in Kiev, and I think throughout Ukraine, waiting for the other shoe to drop, the response.
Yes.
Now, we don't know what that response will be, and I'm not going to ask you to look in a crystal ball, because by the time we publish, it will perhaps already have happened and that it'll become dated. So I don't want to ask you what you think the response will be in exactly. I do want to ask you this question, however. What would it take for the Russians to overplay the response, to do some? What response do you think would compel the West to respond in a larger measure?
Well, Russia will certainly continue its grinding, attriting offensive on the ground, and they've made a fair amount of gains, especially in the Donbass and out by Sumy. And the fact that they opened up the fronts in the north is, as we said, is very significant in the wake of the Kursk operation. I think that the Russians are right now, they're angry. Putin is angry. How do they box themselves? How do they cut themselves out of a Gordian knot that they put themselves into? They have the advantage, if you will, conventionally, and they're doing it, but they are increasingly isolating themselves again at a time when they were, they're working hard to open up pathways into Africa and the Middle East again. China, what does China do? This is a bellwether for China. If the Ukrainians hold, the Taiwanese breathe a sigh of relief, because it is. But Russian reaction, they have their conventional, and they have a lot of awful stuff they can use. They will continue to subvert, work, subversion in every possible way, to grow the gray zone of conflict with the West between a hot war and a cold war is the gray zone. We don't live really, and the Europeans don't live in that gray zone, but the Russians do. The Russians are at war with us in the gray zone. We psychologically are not in that thing. Now, the ranges are, the range of possibilities are all the conventional things we're talking about. And then there are the other things that nobody is talking about right now, but it's waving the nuclear wand, the nuclear blackmail, nuclear subversion, nuclear extortion, and certainly to unsteady the Western, if you will, coalition. but also the Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians have been hearing this yada, yada, yada stuff for 3 years. Saying that, what would make Vladimir Putin snap? I don't know. And I think his own people internally would not necessarily go along with a snap scenario, because it would be basically as they would be lucky just to be a bigger pariah than they are. But we'll have to, and China will hate it. So that out there, those more apocalyptic scenarios, unlikely, but they are in Putin's kit bag. He's frustrated. He's angry. And I think and he's got to find a way to accelerate the grind. His main, he may just elect to continue grinding and grinding and grinding, while the Ukrainians, like a very deft boxer, is, ducking and jiving and back and forth. But the Russians are just continuing to bore in. And it's kind of uncannily if you go look at the battlefronts from 1943 and 1944, when the Soviets were grinding in on the Nazis across the Soviet Union, including much of Ukraine. It was just a grisly war of attrition over the same terrain. I mean, we're talking Kursk, greatest land battle and tank battle in history 80 years ago.
It is the tragedy of Ukraine over and over and over again. We this clash of empires usually ends up with it being this section of Europe that gets soaked in blood as empires kind of go back and forth. Now, you were military attaché to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow during the Obama administration.
Yes.
This was a period of time when Putin was kind of still establishing his dominion. I was there in the late 90s. I remember him coming in and the promises he made to his people.
He was reestablishing his dominion. Yeah.
Okay, sure. But the arrangement and the agreement, the tacit agreement he had with the Russian people is, I will make Russia great again, to paraphrase another slogan.
Okay.
The 90s will not come again. The embarrassment of the fall of the Soviet Union, the discrediting of Russia's might will not happen again. Don't worry about the civil rights. I make those promises to you. Could you even fathom an incident like this happening during your tenure with the people that were your interlocutors and the Russia that you were military attaché? This breaks the promise he's making, is I guess what I'm getting at. What do you think this means for a man who promised no more chaos? He's got a lot of chaos going on in his country now.
Yes, he does. And I arrived in Moscow in 2012, and that was actually very 11 and 12 were very emotional, scary times for Putin and the regime. It's the time of the Bolotnaya protests. Mm-hmm. The streets were in the major cities, Moscow, St. Peter, were full of protests, and they were able to crack down on it and then put out its embers during the year I was there, 2012. But that's out there, and that type of sentiment is been muffled but not snuffed, and they can't. People are throwing figures around of close to 1 million Russian casualties. Nobody can guess the number closest to the nearest 100,000. That's how crazy the numerology is. one way or the other. And the Ukrainians have had, terrible, several hundreds of thousands as well. And again, this is a war that we in the West have not seen in our lifetime since the Second World War. So Putin is managing all that. And when I was there, things were falling apart. Ukraine was getting restive under, I think it was Yanukovych. And the reset was breaking down between the United States and Russia. We had some arms control things that are going on that were very important. I'm quite worried that basically the anti-nuclear cartilage, if you will, between our two nations, the United States and Russia, which then will involve everybody else, whether they want to or not, is fraying. The arms control regimen is fraying. There's almost nothing left except the remnants of New START. And they've got to get something going in 2026, but it was falling apart. When I was there in Moscow, we would visit the Russian Ministry of Defense time. There were still, cordial, formal relations. And as American citizens, diplomatic citizens in Moscow, we were generally okay. Then there was 2014. And, you had Sochi. That was the thing everything was building up to in February, March of 2014. And then, boom, right on the tail end of it are the Bezhlivi Ludzie, the little green men. Yes. Yeah, the polite people that show up in Ukraine. In Crimea, and the lies, and we don't know what's going on. What is this? I remember
nothing to do with us.
Yeah, we're in the embassy trying to figure out all the other countries. What the hell is going on? And then it happens, and then right on top of it, then comes the shadow, but rather violent. Offensive and takeover of much of the Donbass, leading to the Minsk Accords and a frozen line from 2015 to 2022, which is, if there are going to be a solution on land, and Ukraine doesn't want to go that way, but if it comes down to something, what they would grudgingly support is a return to I think, this is me reading, the returning to the 2022 borders, meaning the 2015 borders. I don't know if that's realistic because the Russians have taken now more beyond that. But for the Russians to demand the territories of the rest of Lugansk and Luhansk and Zaporizhia and Donetsk and Kherson. No. And the Russians say, it's ours. We annexed it. You remember that? Later,
a referendum with guards wearing, ballot boxes next to guards with AKs.
Yeah, I mean that's
a referendum,
and so that's the BS that the Russians will play. It's ours now, and the rest of these oblasts are Russian. And oh, by the way, if you remember, if there's any major action or Western influence or even Ukrainian action backed by Western, that's a red line. Do you remember those red line discussions?
Oh, certainly, yes.
No, you're crossing the land. You're crossing the land of sovereign Russia. That word sovereignty gets thrown around a lot. Russia signed off after the fall of the Soviet Union to a free, independent Ukraine during the breakup of the Soviet Union. And in 1994, we all know in the Budapest Memorandum, once again, formally agreed to or reinforced agreement to Ukraine's sovereignty within its boundaries. So that's the bottom line. Those are the lines.
Well, I remember you mentioned Minsk, and I remember that period of time. And I've spoken to various people who were involved in inspections, OSCE, the UN, and it seems to me that period of time, despite what some conspiracy theorists like to say about that period of time, that it was the West was trying to play the Kremlin and play for time so that they could arm the Ukrainians. I look at it very differently because I've spoken to inspectors, and it seems to me more that the West wanted to stick its head in the sand and just say, make it go away, make it go away, make it go away. And so they just did this status quo thing during Minsk. And I bring this up because, again, there's going to be a response from Russia for Spiderweb. Yeah. There will be something. What do you think it would take for the West to stop this posture of, God, we hope it just all ends somehow, to saying, nope, we have a range of bad options here. What's the least bad option? What do you think a response from Russia, from Spiderweb, would prompt the West to go, we got to be all in?
On the left side of the scale, some major action against infrastructure that somehow ends up.
Well, they blew up the Kakhovka Dam already, so
yeah, killing, but also killing and hurting Western civilians, NATO, and all of that. That's one. And by the way, when we talk NATO, EU is also increasingly fired up about all this. I mean, then some type of unbelievable atrocity, and we've seen plenty, but on a mass scale, or that gets airtime and it's kind of thing we can't condone this. Then there is also the prospect, the horror of a chemical attack somewhere along the battlefield or something like that. That kind of really breaks things. And then the threatening or unlikely worst case of a Russian tactical nuclear weapon dropped somewhere in the battlefront that will make everybody just go, oh my God. Or perhaps a nuclear demonstration. The Russians blow it somewhere in relatively uninhabited land, but to make a point. So that's sort of the range of options, along with the continued attempted subversion of Western nations. They have brought China in somewhat, but I believe these type of actions would actually repel China. But the worst thing, China does not like this war necessarily, but it serves their end. But the worst thing for China is if Russia is somehow defeated, and then China is alone. And so there's that balancing act there. And then you have, the upsetting, disrupting markets. They played the oil card, and it hasn't fully worked. The Europeans have pretty well weaned themselves from Russian petroleum products, and gas prices are going down, which is really bad for Russia. Mm-hmm. So I go back. There are two things that I think strategically have happened in the last month. One, believe it or not, is when Putin decides not to fly down Turkey, Middle East to meet Zelensky, and Trump was willing to be there and face-to-face talk about it. He balked, and then a lot of support, certainly American, wobbliness got firmer because the Russians aren't playing, they're becoming obstinate, and that's even in Trump's mind when the Russians continued to rocket Ukraine, and then he goes publicly on his True Social, Putin is crazy, in capital letters. That was not part of Putin's calculus. That is a strategic mistake. And then the other one is what we just saw a few days ago. The breadth and the obstinance and the creativity and the technology of Ukrainian strike, which they really did on their own. The word has it, they didn't share the details of this with the United States. Which
this is just what I was about to ask you. This is just, I mean, what does that, again, we go back to the Oval. You mentioned it earlier, this concept of you don't have any cards. You don't have a say in this. Well, the Ukrainians have just shown that's not necessarily the case. But you're right. They didn't apparently consult or inform, the U.S. POTUS was taken by surprise by this. What do you think this means? And then you also mentioned Hexit not going to Ramstein. What does Spiderweb mean to Ukrainian relations with a Trump administration, do you think?
Sadly, in the current structure and administration, they want to work with us, they want our support, but at the same point, they don't trust us. And that includes their we talk about our sharing of intelligence with them, but it's their sharing of intelligence to us. And the very real concern that if they shared aspects of Spiderweb to our government, to our intelligence services, it could or would leak. And I think they didn't. They may have shared it with a few Europeans. I just don't know. But what is interesting is that this really was a Ukrainian homegrown operation with strategic breadth and really, really upped enhanced their credibility in the United States and in the circles politically too that are not directly, if you will, part of our inner government.
Well, let's certainly hope so. Well, we have to kind of wrap it up here. It's been a great chance to acquaint ourselves with one another. I first met you on that trip when you came to Kiev, when you were working, when you were on with the Renewed Democracy Initiative, which is Gary Kasparov's group. I think that he was the
that was a real.
It was a fantastic trip and a real pleasure to meet you. So it was very nice to see you once again. But I want to, I can't ask you to look into a crystal ball over what happens in the next 4 days before we publish this, because we might date ourselves. But I am going to ask you to look into your crystal ball in terms of bigger picture. I feel that when, again, the history of this war is recorded and documented fully, this will be an inflection point. What the Ukrainians have done will change the course of the war. What are your thoughts on that, and where do you see the war going?
Yes,
from here in light of it.
If in the end, with as great as this was, and they're also the use of their drones and technology over the battlefield, no man's land, trench lines are barely covered by people now because it's basically a dead zone on both sides. But beyond all this, which is hugely important in showing the world and showing us that the Ukrainians have a proud and vibrant heartbeat, they are still in an awful, grinding war of attrition. And it looks, at least it seems, that the Russians are just going to continue to press and attrit as much as they can, while the Ukrainians will fight them and respond and all of that and do very effectively and give a lot of casualties and take some. They have to get out of that linear fight, that attritional fight. This certainly did that to a point, but now they're back on force. And we're all waiting for whatever the Russian summer offensive is, and it promises to be even more brutal. And I remember when I saw you in Ukraine 2 years ago, all the talk was, God bless, was the Ukrainian summer offensive. They were going to go into it. So the war can shift and change in many ways, but the one thing we know for sure, that the Ukrainians will bend, but they will not break. They have proven that over and over and over again. And this thing that they did, this strike, had to have been eye-opening for most and inspiring for many. And could help buy them some time as they come up with other ways to hobble asymmetrically this Russian bear. And that's really what it is. It's a Russian bear hook that they constantly are working their way around and out of. And we've got to support them. I really believe that this fight is a civilizational fight for certainly the West, or not even the West, the free-minded nations of the world. We should see it that way. We don't, and continue to work every avenue and sanctions on all of that to keep pressure, heavy pressure on the Russians, as well as all lines open.
Well, let's hope it also inspires Western capitals to realize that that the Russians are not an inevitability, that they are not invulnerable, and that we, if we apply the right support, hopefully Ukraine will have a better chance of defending itself.
We talked about Samson and Goliath 2 years ago. Well, you just had another example. I mean, the Ukrainians just
David and Goliath. Sorry.
Samson and Goliath. Forgive me.
Yeah.
I mean, the Ukrainians just slung another rock into the Russians' eye, and we just have to stay on the ball and not allow ourselves to get distracted, and not allow our politics to pull us away from the bigger picture. Europe seems to get it more and more, and I want to believe that our domestic politics are beginning to turn in that direction. And as I said, this is the second strategic failure of the Russians. One, the attack just now, and the possible shifting of Trump, who now maybe isn't ardently for Ukraine, but now has real question about Putin and the Russians' motives.
Yeah. Well, please convey, as I say, to all there back in the States from Kiev that we're exhausted, but we are not defeated, and the people that I surround myself with here, as tired as they are still determined to defend their land. So let folks know that you know, the Ukrainians are not out of fight yet, not by a long shot. So.
I think that is wildly evident, and I think that's a key port. You're going to support a ally, partner, friend, different definitions, who's got real skin in the game. And if the Ukrainians have shown they do, right? They're fighting for their lives as people and a nation. Russians just stated again, they want to subjugate. A medieval term. I'm going to stop here. Russians don't want to defeat Ukraine or take Ukraine. They want Ukraine to submit to Russia as you would have had to submit to survive in the medieval ages. And so I think that the fact that they continue to just irritate the Russians in major ways is remarkable, and it's creating significant stress in the Russian population. Let's see what happens. You're in a key place, Phil. I appreciate your mission, and I appreciate you inviting me onto your show. I'm sorry I got into my stream of consciousness here.
No, it's great, and it's nice to touch base again. It's nice. We'll stay in touch, and hopefully someday, in the not too distant future, we will see each other in person here in a peaceful and prosperous.
I would like that. I would like that. And please, once it's done and edited, send me the clip, and I'll push that into social media. Okay.
I very much appreciate your time, General. General Peter Zwack. As safe as I can be, General.
God
Thank
bless
you so much for your time.
Slava Ukraine.
Героям слава.